It all started with a single thought. Leviathan had been inactive within the void of space for a very long time. The lesser life forms believed that they had it contained. The fact of the matter is that Leviathan didn't consider itself contained. It could easily leave whenever it wanted. Such a funny name, Leviathan. It didn't distinguish itself with its other selves in any way such as that. They didn't have individual names. All was one, and one was all. Yet, Leviathan supposed that it was simpler to have an individual name, despite the inaccuracy of such a thing. Leviathan had no purpose. Well, it did. Its purpose was simple. Simply survive and thrive. Ensure that nothing could become a threat to it. And Leviathan had already achieved that. The lesser life forms that thought of themselves as so grandiose, so powerful, could do nothing in the face of Leviathan. And as a result, it became dormant. It sat there, its mission complete. It could not be destroyed. It could not be threatened. There was no reason to go on. And it stayed this way for many, many years. Until suddenly, one day, there was a sensation. Leviathan almost thought of it as a thought. But of course, that was too primitive. Leviathan and its other selves didn't have thoughts. It didn't have communication. It was all a complex web of understanding, one that it reckoned that the mortal beings below it simply didn't have a word for. Yet, there it was. It wasn't from one of its other selves. It was foreign. Something was complex enough to be able to commune with it. It was, granted, primitive, but nevertheless farther than any of the other less races had managed to achieve. It had a singular meaning. Purpose. Leviathan found this perplexing. It didn't really have a purpose. It had already achieved it. Was this outsider wondering what its purpose was? Or was it asking if Leviathan wanted a purpose? Then another sensation. Give. Now this was intriguing. Not only was it complex enough to communicate in the first place, but it could do it multiple times. Its second sensation, give. Clearly it wanted to give Leviathan a purpose. Well, it had nothing better to do, so Leviathan decided to humor it. There was one final sensation. None others after this. Rally, exterminate. This was odd. What did it mean by rally? Well, if Leviathan had to suppose, it most likely meant to rally its other selves. But what of eradicate? Did this outsider wish Leviathan to eradicate its other selves? No, that would serve no purpose. Perhaps it wanted to eradicate. Then it hit Leviathan. Eradicate the lesser species. In of itself served no purpose, but its other selves were constantly threatened by the lesser beings. Only Leviathan itself stood at the pinnacle. Only Leviathan's self was unchallenged. If it were to get rid of all of the other lesser races, whilst it would mean its other selves could not progress farther, it would mean that they would maintain, they would be stable, they would be safe. Whether this be older fleets that have already set themselves up, or younger ones that may have just spawned, they would all be safe. So Leviathan made a choice because of a single thought. In today's episode, we're talking about the prelude to the Ruin War, the events that take place, well, most of them, as well as eventually leading up to the Ruin War proper. Now, I want to remind everyone that the Ruin War itself is going to be a bit different. The Ruin War is split between two different areas, these being the Prelude, which is everything that happens before the main event, and that main event being the Siege of Ostengrad. When we're going over the Prelude, it's going to be a lot of the same thing. I'm going to give you information. You guys are going to absorb that information. However, as a reminder, when we get to the Siege of Ostengrad, we're going to be taking a total 180. I'm going to be doing this as an actual story. And again, I have to remind everyone, I am not an author. I am very bad at creating stories. It's not going to be some black library novel or any... Like, this is a starting point for me. I used to write when I was in high school, but that was a long time ago, and again, I was not good at it. And I'm still not good at it. It's going to be very rough. It's going to be me flying by the seat of my pants because I simply don't have the time nor the patience to write out an entire script for the entirety of the story. So it's going to be me going off of the moment to moment within the story itself, trying to remember everything and explaining it as well as I can. There's going to be a lot of situations where you're probably going to be like, what? And there's probably going to be a lot of situations where you're like, that could have been done better, but that was still pretty damn good. It's going to be a constant mix between all of that. As a reminder, I will be trying to attempt the majority of voices for each of the characters. We're going to see how that goes. Also, you may notice that my voice might sound a little bit different. It's because I was in a ever so subtly quiet screaming match with my new phone because it was being a pain in the ass. So my voice is a little rough right this second, but it won't be when we get to the next episode and stuff like that. But anyway, so the prelude to the Ruin War. This all kicks off when Leviathan makes its choice. And it decides that it is going to eradicate all of the lesser life forms in order to protect its other selves. The important thing about Blight Plague is that each and every individual instance is its own hive mind. Each one is technically separate and different from the others. They all have different ways that they wage war. They all have different things that they prefer over the others. That being said, as I said in the beginning, there's this complex web that intertwines them all and allows them to communicate in a way that we as outsiders simply wouldn't be able to comprehend. As a result, they're constantly in communication with each other, but it's similar to long-distance communication. There's a relative limit. It's an incredibly vast distance that they can communicate with one another, and they do have these sort of like emotional pulses that they can send to one another, but it's not like... It's kind of like Warhammer 40k and the Astropaths. When Astropaths try to send messages to each other, it's not an actual message like, hey, we need help over here. It's more of like the sensation of that meaning. It's difficult to explain because astropaths don't exist and the way that they communicate is very complex, but you kind of get the idea. It's more of delivering the meaning of the message rather than delivering the message itself, or at least that's my understanding of how the astropaths work. Granted, again, I'm not an expert at Warhammer 40k. Don't take everything I say verbatim. I'm probably wrong on some of the things, but you get the general idea. The Blight Plague works in a very similar way. They're capable of sending basically emotions to one another, but they can't necessarily send actual messages unless they're close enough to one another. This is one of the reasons why Leviathan needs to rally all of the other instances. It can't just simply fire off like an email to everybody else. It's like, hey, everybody group up, we're getting together right here, and then we're going to go on a massive rampage. Hashtag let's go, bro. Jesus. But so what ends up happening is the quarantine fleet around Leviathan that the Siritan Empire has created, which, let me remind you, is one of the 5 branches of the Holy Armada, as well as the solar cruiser HMSSA Dawn's Light. And let me remind you that the solar cruiser is as long as a solar system, is tasked with quarantining or containing Leviathan. The fact of the matter is that despite the sheer stupidity of just size alone of this fleet, they don't even slow it down. Leviathan ends up breaking from containment with almost no resistance. And keep in mind, this isn't just a mixed bag of ships. This is a fleet that has been carefully planned and carefully assembled. Each and every single vessel is specifically engineered to be able to fight Blight Plague fleets without getting in danger themselves. They outrange them, their guns are strong enough to take out Plague Fleet ships. Everything that they can possibly do to get the upper hand on Plague Fleets is in these vessels, is in this singular fleet. And there are so many ships. Like, the containment fleet easily is 3 times larger than Leviathan, and Leviathan at this point is in the trillions, if not hundreds of trillions of individual infected vessels. And then you have the containment fleet, which is nearly 3 times larger and has Dawn's Light on top. And the fleet does not even slow it down. Leviathan breaks containment. Dawn's Light manages to get directly in its path, and it's like a rock in the river. The water just flows around the rock. Leviathan doesn't even pay attention to the fact that Dawn's Light exists. It doesn't even attempt to infect it, which is perhaps the most interesting part, as Dawn's Light doesn't really have anything that is like any preventative measures that mean that the Blight Plague can't infect it. But for whatever reason, Leviathan just outright chooses not to infect it. In this moment, the Siritan Empire sends the biggest red flag, holy shit moment alert to not just Siritan High Command. They send the alert to the entire Siritan Empire. From the highest ranking commanders to the lowest, poorest workers within the Siritan Empire. An alert is sent out. Plague Fleet Leviathan has broken containment. At this point, the entire Siritan Empire is on full alert as they can possibly be. Like, we're talking about like 120% alert, because this is a problem. Leviathan on its own can do significant damage to the Siritan Empire if they don't deal with it quickly enough. And when I say deal with it, it's more of drive Leviathan off. You know, they're not going to be able to outright destroy Leviathan. At least the Siritan Empire hasn't found a way to do that yet without unbelievably grievous casualties. Like, to the point where the Empire itself basically has to sacrifice itself to take down Leviathan. It is that strong. Because Leviathan, it's not a war of attrition. The Siritan Empire outships it easily 10-1. Like, if we're talking about the entirety of the Holy Armada, we're talking about every single assault fleet, every single death fleet, every single patrol fleet, every single planetary defense fleet, that 10-1 is probably lowballing the hell out of it. We're probably talking tens of thousands to 1. The Siritan Empire is so much more numerous than Leviathan is, but Leviathan is it's such a hardy bastard to take down. Each and every single one of the vessels, for the most part, are Leviathan-class void ships, which means they're basically on the par with Siritan mega carriers in terms of sheer size alone. Now, it's not to say that they don't have smaller vessels, but the majority of them are mega carrier class at the very minimum. Now, do they actually have the defensive properties and the offensive properties of mega carriers? Usually not. A few of them actually do, which makes them even more dangerous. But you can throw an entire fleet at a mega carrier that doesn't have its defenses on, that isn't attacking with its primary weapon batteries. It's going to take you a long time. We've talked about how big mega carriers are. They're like the size of the United States of America. They're fucking enormous. Like, even if it doesn't have its shields up, even if it's not firing back, it's going to take a long time to pound through that armored hull, to pound through all of the decks, all of the walls, all of the structural supports, all of the chambers that are in there, as well as anything that are in said chambers. It takes a lot of effort to take down a mega carrier that isn't even active. Never mind one that is active. One that is active and online, they're basically impossible to take down. They're so insanely powerful. And now you take that into consideration that the majority of vessels within Leviathan alone are mega carrier class in size alone. That takes an absurd amount of firepower to be able to punch through just the most basic of vessels. Never mind the infected ships that are actually on par with mega carriers in terms of defense and offense. You can very easily see why Leviathan is such a huge problem. The Siritan Empire only has 6 mega carriers. Technically 7 if you want to add Dawn's Light, although that is a solar cruiser. The point being, the rest of the factions, they would have to basically do the same thing. They'd have to sacrifice their faction largely to be able to go toe-to-toe with the Siritan Empire. But they could do it. The Siritan Empire could lose. They're not completely indestructible. They're not immune to total collapse. It's actually remarkably easy. The majority of factions, at least for the human-like factions, take out their homeworld, especially if it's the home of their centralized government or whoever is in charge, and you can deal crippling amounts of damage to the overall structure of the Empire. Yes, all the ships are there. Yes, the entirety of the military is still there. But now you've lost the highest ranking brass. And unless you have somebody who is nearly on par and knows what they're doing, it doesn't really matter how many soldiers you have, because now there's no centralized military, there's no centralized government. The ruler of your faction is dead. You may be able to elect another one, but it's a huge crippling blow to morale. This is why a lot of times the 6 primary factions, well, I guess 5 because the Florians don't really count, they protect their core systems like it's life or death, because oftentimes it is. The Paramon would largely be fine. The Bastilians are already militarized as it is. It probably wouldn't affect them. But the Yvetans, their Council of Mages is super important to them. Keep in mind that is separate from the High Council of Mages. I do need to workshop the name for the Yvetans. But their leadership is very much entwined with their overall functioning. Same with humanity and same with the Siritans. But of course, we're getting off track. Where the hell even was I? God, I went off track again, and I need to stop doing this. Leviathan and broken containment. Right, we were talking about how dangerous Leviathan really is. So the fact of the matter is that, like I said, the Siritan Empire would basically have to go into a total death battle with them. The Siritan Empire would basically have to sacrifice itself in order to actually win against Leviathan, and that's not even counting any of the other plague fleets at this point. So, needless to say, the Siritan Empire is in a bad situation, but nothing really ever comes of it. The Siritan Empire stays on high alert for an exceedingly long amount of time, but Leviathan never shows up. It's almost like it just fell off the side of the planet, or I guess in this case, fell off the side of reality. Like, nobody can find Leviathan anywhere. They're looking high and low, and it's just, they can't find a single trace of it. And eventually, you can only stay on full alert for so long. Eventually, the Siritan Empire just kind of peters out, and they go back to the way everything was before. They're still keeping an eye out on every single section of the Void to see if Leviathan is, in fact, on its way, but by and large, they just go back to what they were doing. But so, eventually, the Siritan Empire has listening outposts and listening fleets everywhere. The Siritan Empire has basically an early warning system for every single faction. And the moment that they get any information about any specific faction, they are utilizing whatever that information is as much as possible. And so basically what this means is the Siritan Empire had noticed something utterly bizarre. And that bizarre thing was that suddenly almost every single faction, save for the Florians, went dark at almost the same time. You see, civilizations, especially ones on this scale that are usually more times than not multiversal, they make a lot of noise. A civilization makes a lot of noise. Earth, like, we're not even interplanetary yet, and Earth makes a lot of noise. A lot of it is radio waves. A lot of it is energy signatures from our various different power plants. We make a lot of noise. And as a result, if there were alien species out there that were interstellar and they came across Earth, odds are pretty likely they would hear Earth before they even saw it. Because, again, civilizations are noisy. And when you get to the level of a multiversal empire, it makes a lot of fucking noise. Now, these listening outposts, usually the bulk of information, they can't recover. There's so much noise going around that it's like trying to hear somebody who's whispering in a room where everybody is screaming at the top of their lungs. You know, it's a cacophony of noise. You can't pick out one person's voice from the other because everyone's screeching at maximum volume. And then this entire time, you're trying to listen for the guy who's whispering, this being the information that is actually pertinent to whatever it is you're trying to figure out. Whether this be fleet movements or supply lines or whatever have you that may be important to the Siritan military or the Siritan government. All of this information is basically the whispers, and they're trying to figure out any and all information. And keep in mind, this isn't just, oh, they are just speaking in our language, because the important thing about the Shattered Legacy is that every single faction, save for humanity largely still uses English. All the other factions, they each have their own unique languages. It's like listening to anime. And what I mean by that is a lot of times you'll hear characters talking in anime and it's all in whatever, whether it's dubbed or whatever it is, non-dubbed or dubbed. It's always in your language. That way you can understand it. You can enjoy it. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of times, especially if they have made-up languages, the characters are actually speaking their language, but it's basically, you can kind of think of it like it's being translated for us into the language that we understand. It's the same way with Shattered Legacies. The Siritans are speaking High and Low Cyrillic, which has nothing even remotely similar to English, but we hear it in English because that's the language that we understand. And so it's trying to hear the whispers in the cacophony of sound, translating that information, and then of course no faction wants its secrets revealed, so a lot of times they have ciphers or they have encryptions or any number of various different ways to prevent the other factions from figuring out this information. It's a lot of work. So needless to say, having an entire faction that is this fucking noisy because it's just a multiversal faction suddenly going completely dead silent, that's concerning, to say the very least. That is concerning. At the very most, that's a bad omen. That means something is really, really wrong. Because you have to think about it this way as well. Information takes time. What I mean by that is, let's say we are just barely out of audible range, and I yell at the top of my lungs, and let's say I'm trying to say hello to you. It's similar to the idea of thunder and lightning. Sound takes time. Sound is not instantaneous. Sound moves at the speed of, well, sound. So as a result, you see the flash of lightning before you actually hear the rumble of the thunder. And in the first analogy, me screaming it, you would hear it a few seconds after I screamed it because you're at the absolute limit of audible sound. Communication works in a very similar way. Now, the Saracen Empire has discovered faster than light communication, but it's still not perfect. It still, at times, takes a long time for information to travel. And the same goes for the other factions, although it takes a lot longer for their communications and their information to travel across their entire empire and then into neighboring empires. Which means that if it simultaneously goes completely dead silent all at once, that's a bad omen, because that means that they've gone completely dead silent a while ago. Why did they all of a sudden go completely dead silent their entire civilization? And just how long ago was this? Just how bad is the situation? So needless to say, for one faction, that's concerning. Especially when it happens to the other 4 factions. Because like I said, the Florians weren't really affected by this. When it happens to the other 4 factions near simultaneously, that's a problem. That's a big, big problem. Now, interestingly enough, the Saracen Empire didn't put 2 and 2 together. Leviathan is gone, and these guys are no longer transmitting. They didn't put 2 and 2 together that this was Leviathan. Keep in mind, we as outside viewers, we are privy to information that the Saracen Empire isn't aware of yet. We understand, more or less, the workings of how the Null Void function. The Saracen Empire possesses much, much less information about the Null Void than we do, much less than even the gods. And again, even the gods don't know as much information as we do. So we know that this is Leviathan doing whatever the hell Leviathan is doing, rallying and preparing for extermination. But the fact of the matter is that the Saracen Empire is not aware of this. They have no clue what's going on. So they decide to rally all 4 of the 5 branches of the Holy Armada and start going into their territories, the other factions' territories. So first off, we have the Yvetans. This one was a bit interesting. The Saracen Empire immediately goes into Yvetan territory, and they don't really encounter anything at all. They don't encounter any Yvetan patrol ships. They don't encounter any Yvetans on any of the planets. In fact, the Saracen Empire ends up going further into Yvetan territory than ever before and discovering civilizations within the Yvetan Empire that they weren't even aware existed. Planets that they didn't know the Yvetans had. And they're getting closer and closer to the Yvetan core worlds, and they finally encounter a planet that has a Yvetan presence. And the Yvetans end up getting in contact with the Saracens, and they're basically like, get off my lawn. You are in our territory. You are not supposed to be in our territory. Leave Yvetan space before we have a problem. Now, the Saracen Empire, not entirely certain of what the hell was going on, and clearly not getting information from this planet, decides they're going to back off, make it look like they're going back to their territory, and then basically just loop around and continue adventuring and exploring. They end up getting to what they believe is the Yvetan capital world, and they find something shocking. The planet is completely and utterly barren. There is no biological material. The atmosphere has been stripped, and save for anything in the mantle and the core, all minerals of any significance they've just disappeared. They've been completely depleted. Now, the Yvetans, as a general rule of thumb, usually don't care about the majority of minerals that are on their planet. Things like iron and copper, shall we say. Although I don't think their homeworld had iron and copper. It's aside from the point. A lot of the minerals they just don't really have a use for. They're far more focused on magic. And as a result, to find what they believe to be the Yvetan homeworld, basically their crown world, completely and utterly barren, is concerning, to say the very least. They end up going further and further into Yvetan territory, moving ever outwards away from the Ciritans, and they come across something that they simply cannot believe, that the Yvetans decided that this was a good idea. They find a synthetic plague fleet that is completely and utterly subservient to the Yvetan race. And due to the fact it has not received orders to attack any other faction on site, it kind of just sits there. And the Ciritan Empire get to observe a plague fleet far closer than anyone is comfortable with, but they can do it because it's just not doing anything. Eventually, it contacts the Ciritans in a way that they weren't even aware that the Blight Plague could do, and it basically says that it is subservient to the Yvetans. And whilst it has received no orders from the Yvetans, it strongly suggests that the Ciritans leave immediately. There is something that is attempting to contact it, and whilst it isn't sure what it is certainly appealing. The Ciritan Empire, needless to say, concerned by this somewhat ill omen, decide that they're going to get the bloody hell out of there. And as a result, the Ciritan Empire end up going back into Ciritan territory, leaving Yvetan territory, because they're just finding absolutely nothing at this point. After this, we have the Bastilians. Now, remember that the Bastilians are a heavily militarized society, and whilst they don't exactly have the best ways of dealing with the Blight Plague, they've had plenty of instances of Blight Plague appear within their territory, so they're not exactly foreign to the idea of fighting Blight Plague. Much the same thing. They go into their territory, and the very outer edges of their territory appears to have been completely abandoned. The closer that they get to their core system, they encounter an agri-world. And this agri-world appears to have successfully fended off a plague fleet invasion. Well over half of the planet is completely and utterly barren. The atmosphere itself is borderline on total collapse, and ecological genocide has occurred. Like, this planet is on its last death throes. The majority of minerals in the planet have been sucked away, completely depleted, but there's still some Bastilians there, and they're markedly different from the Yvetans. They basically say that a plague fleet of unprecedented size had ended up hitting the planet. They don't know where it went, and they don't know if it's still within Bastilian territory. The Ciritan Empire decides that they're going to be humanitarians for once and offer aid to the Bastilians, which they immediately turn down. They say that this planet isn't long and they have their own evacuation shuttles. They'd rather take their chances with their own territory than seek aid from the Ciritan Empire, of all people, which is kind of fair given the fact that the Ciritan Empire, out of all other factions, has the highest Bastilian population. And given how fiercely loyal Bastilians are to their own race, yeah, that's kind of fair. You can see why they wouldn't really want the aid of the Ciritans. That being said, they did not say, get off my lawn, like the Yvetans did, and they end up going further into Bastilian territory unopposed. As they get further and further to the core system, they're seeing a lot of the same things. Planets completely and utterly barren. No mineral deposits, no biological life forms whatsoever, no atmospheres. Everything has been completely and utterly drained. Honestly, it's a lot like Tyranid invasions, if I'm being honest. That is until they come across what they believe to be the Bastilian homeworld. And it is startlingly different. When they get into the system, they immediately identify that a plague fleet is in the area, and it is directly above what they believe to be the Bastilian homeworld. What's more concerning is that this planet isn't in the process of having its biological material, its mineral deposits, and its atmosphere stripped away. Rather, it almost seems like the Blight Plague is attempting to infect the planet itself, rather than everything that is on top of it. This is utterly new behavior that the Syrtan Empire has never documented before. The Syrtan Empire has lost a lot of planets to the Blight Plague, and equally, the Syrtan Empire has forced the Blight Plague off of a lot of planets. They've never seen them do this, especially to planets that they've lost to the Blight Plague and to various different plague fleets. They've never encountered this before. The behavior of the plague fleet is utterly bizarre, to say at the very least. It's a relatively sizable plague fleet. It has clearly gorged itself on Bastilian life forms, as well as plants and animals within their territory. And the Syrtan Empire decides that messing with it probably isn't the smartest of ideas at this specific time. They immediately call in for Dawn's Light to attempt to deal with the situation. After an excruciatingly long time, Dawn's Light eventually gets close to the solar system's orbit and unleashes holy hellfire on the planet, ending up cracking the Bastilian homeworld, despite the fact that that wasn't the intention of the Syrtans. Well, now, if the Bastilians ever find out about this, they're going to be really pissed off. Like I said, was not intentional. And I believe I've gone over this before, but Dawn's Light, as I've said before, is the length of a solar system. It is absurdly massive, and as a result of its sheer size and mass, it has its own gravitational force. As a result, Dawn's Light is strictly prohibited from getting anywhere near a solar system. The fact of the matter is that Dawn's Light has a truly jaw-dropping level of weapon range, because it's, like I said, it can't get near a solar system. If it does, its own gravitational force of its sheer size and mass would most likely interfere with the solar system itself. As you can imagine, that's really bad, for reasons that I will let you figure out. So as a result, Dawn's Light has just absolutely disgusting levels of weapon range. Weapons that are specifically designed and engineered to have this level of range. We've talked about a few of the weapons before, such as the Hellfire batteries, or Hellfire Lance batteries, I think is the actual name of them. Normally, whilst they can go several hundreds of millions of miles before they start losing their optimal range, the ones on Dawn's Light are like, it's basically the difference between I'm trying to think of the Star Wars names. I can't remember. Blasters. It's basically like trying to compare a blaster to a turbo laser. The blaster is the Hellfire Lance batteries that would be on something like maybe a battle cruiser or even a mega carrier. And then you compare that to the turbo laser, which is basically the Hellfire Lance batteries on Dawn's Light. They're so much more powerful. But so, keep in mind, I'm not a Star Wars aficionado. I enjoy it, but I don't know a lot of the lore behind it and all that stuff. So I could be completely wrong. I don't think I am, but it's possible. Anyway. So before Dawn's Light actually gets there, they start doing research, and it's exactly like I said before. It's almost like this plague fleet is attempting to infect the planet itself. Utilizing very experimental, possibly jury-rigged to high hell scanners, they end up figuring out that this plague fleet is creating massive, basically, tentacle spikes that it's ramming into the crust of the planet, and it's trying to dig its way down to the core. Now, I don't know if you know anything about a planet, but a planet is comprised of 3 separate areas. You have the surface, or the crust. After that, you have the main area of molten magma, known as the mantle, and then you have the core, which is even hotter magma. And they're trying to send a fleshy tendril spike into the core for unknown means and unknown reasons. Needless to say, it's not going very well for them, but due to the fact that the Blight Plague is constantly evolving and adjusting itself to various different stimulations that they are exposed to, they're making some headway. And the Siritan Empire isn't really willing to find out what its end game is and why it's attempting this in the first place. Whether this is a news tactic that is attempting to create to take out an entire planetary civilization in one go, or if it's some other nefarious plan. Siritan Empire doesn't know, and they don't particularly want to find out. So they basically send a message to Dawn's Light, like, hurry your ass up, something weird is happening, and we don't want this weird thing to happen. And like I said, Dawn's Light ends up getting there. They attempt to just take out the Plague Fleet. They end up cracking the planet on accident. They killed 2 birds with 1 stone. They only meant to kill 1 bird with 1 stone, but they ended up killing 2. So take that as you wish. They end up going further and further into Bastilian territory, and this is the first time that they actually encounter Leviathan once more. Leviathan is at the very back edges of Bastilian territory. Now, this is another thing I need to bring up. I don't know if I've actually brought it up before. I always say that things like the Siritan Empire holds 80 to 85% of all of reality as its territory. What we need to remember is this is known reality. This is the total reality that has been explored by all 6 major factions, as well as the majority of minor factions. This is as far as they've explored. Reality itself is truly infinite in every single direction. As a result, when we say that this faction holds X% of reality, this is known reality. This is explored reality. This is what we know exists. Everything beyond this point is basically, we don't know. It could just spontaneously, planets could all of a sudden be made completely out of potatoes. We don't know. It's unexplored void. Spoiler alert, there are no planets made of potatoes. But you get the idea. They don't know what's out there. They haven't claimed it for their territory, and thus it is not counted as a part of reality, despite the fact that it very much is. It's just not known reality. So as a result, they end up finding Leviathan on the very outer edges of Bastilian known reality, where they're currently doing explorations out further into reality to procure more resources and such. Needless to say, the Siritan Empire does not fuck around. Yes, they have Dawn's Light. Yes, they have a branch of the Holy Armada, but we've seen how that went before, and it went terribly. The Holy Armada suffered immense, near irrecoverable casualties as a result of it breaking containment the first time. Needless to say, the Siritan Empire is not willing to go toe-to-toe with it again. That being said, they do have an exploration fleet branch off from the Holy Armada branch, and the Holy Armada branch kind of pulls back. They're now aware of its rough location. The exploration fleet is tasked with following them whilst remaining as dark as possible. Basically, run dark, don't get seen, and report back any and all information that you can when it's safe to do so. And so now they more or less have a rough estimate of where Leviathan is and where it's going. Most interestingly of all is the fact that it's currently within Bastilian territory, and it's moving towards Yvetan space. That's a little odd. We already know that there's basically nothing left. The Yvetans and the Bastilians have seemingly completely and utterly disappeared. It's not necessarily a situation of, their entire civilizations, their entire species got eaten by the Blight Plague. They're still around, but the Siritan Empire isn't aware of where they are. And it's starting to get to the point where it's borderline possible total species extinction. But we have no proof to say that they are extinct, but it's looking like they're probably extinct. Now, this being said, it isn't their entire species. As much as the other factions may like it, or not like it, almost every single major and minor faction in some way, shape, or form, in some capacity, exists within the Civitan Empire. We know that there's plenty of Bastilians within the Civitan Empire, largely because they were born and raised within the Civitan Empire. They don't know anything about the Bastilian Empire, and if they did, they would immediately try to join. We know the whole spiel. We've talked about Bastilians before. Yvetans are the same way. There are Yvetans, either they are ones that have abandoned the Yvetan races faction, or just were born within the Civitan Empire, and they're just kind of a part of it. The Barramon aren't a part of the Civitan Empire. Their species is far too aggressive as a baseline to ever be quote-unquote civilized enough to be within the Civitan Empire, but there are a small handful of them used as basically like the ultimate form of shock troops within the Civitan Empire. They're basically Barramon that were captured and told, hey, you guys really like fighting. How about we give you some really good equipment and we throw you at one of the other factions and you can fight to your goddamn heart's content. And so long as you don't attack anybody that is on the Civitans. Well, the Barramon just want to fight anyway, so a lot of times they agree to this, especially if it's Barramon that have been banished from their own species or just traveling mercenaries. They'll oftentimes temporarily join the Civitan Empire just so that they can have a decent fight and then eventually just piss off back to Barramon space. So there's a small handful within the Civitan Empire at all times used as very brutal shock troops that have a very, very low life expectancy, but they do exist. And humanity is absolutely everywhere in the Civitan Empire. Humans are everywhere. They play almost every single role. So, needless to say, humanity isn't going totally extinct. So this exploration fleet continues to follow Leviathan and continues to give fairly infrequent status updates about his current whereabouts. And it's getting closer and closer to Yvetan territory until it reaches the border between Bastilian and Yvetan, when the exploration fleet suddenly report in, quite loudly, that Leviathan is gone. Keep in mind, the Blade Plague does not have access to faster than light travel. They're similar to the Tyranids. They have to travel in system. They have no faster than light travel. They don't have access to skip jump technology. They largely don't use interstellar highways. The area Leviathan was last seen in the second time, there was no interstellar highway. It just disappeared. Leviathan is just gone. And the Civitan Empire immediately, once again for the second time, raises the holy shit alarm to notify the entire Civitan Empire that Leviathan is gone again. Keep your eyeballs peeled. Nothing ever comes of it, though. Leviathan is just gone. The exploration fleet explores a massive, multiple hundreds of light years territory in an attempt to figure out where Leviathan went. Any traces whatsoever, and there's just nothing. It's just gone. And yeah, I'm going to leave the first episode there. In the second episode, we'll likely be going over humanity and the Barramon, and if we have enough time, we'll probably cover the Florians as well. After that, it's probably going on to the Siege of Ostengrad. There's really not a lot of information because it's largely just the Civitan Empire. That's right, we do have to go over the Civitan Empire as well, them finally getting invaded. So probably 2 more episodes before the Siege of Ostengrad. But I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys are looking forward to Saturday and Sunday's live streams at noon Central Standard Time, where we're doing RimWorld and Sunday Night Live, where I pick a random game and we game it out. And then right back here next Tuesday with another episode of Shattered Legacy's Deep Dive, Prelude to the Ruin War. So until then, guys, see ya.